Yeah, good evening. So great you all came. It's first time Beeple is showing in Germany, showing with us. And this will be a talk tonight with Beeple, myself, and of course Carolyn Christov-Bakargiev, who is also a special guest because she was actually the first from the contemporary art world who engaged with Beeple. I'm Lisa Botti, I'm a curator here, and I will just give a 5 to 10 minutes introduction on why we invited Beeple here. Afterwards, Mike will talk a bit about the work you will see later at 7 p.m. downstairs, Regular Animals, and then Carolyn will also do a short presentation and a conversation with Beeple and myself. So when we do exhibitions here in National Gallery, we always wonder, why do we do this exhibition now? Why do we do this here in Berlin, here at National Gallery, and why do we do this at all? And I would actually like to start with a quote of you, Carolyn, you gave the other day in an interview that you say, museums are spaces where the world meets the culture at large. It's where museum is always an agent for it's an agent for change. So if you look at the current discourse, the biggest change in our lives is technology. It's shaping economies, politics, our daily lives. So if you just scroll through, I just took photos of the recent newspapers I read. There you see on the headline Dario, who's the CEO of Anthropic. You might all remember the discussion on the US government and the Iran war, how to use AI in wars. There's another cover from The Economist I just saw at a friend's place, and you might recognize the 5 men. The title is, who are these 5 men are shaping the AI, and it's, do you recognize them all? Who is it? Yeah, in the front it's Dario with the glasses. Demis is the one with the laptop in his hand. Elon is scrolling. Mark is taking a selfie, and in the front it's Sam Altman from OpenAI. So why is it so interesting that now private companies are in charge of shaping kind of the world? Because it really affects us all. I give you just a few examples. We all know the recent discussion on Google Maps, where Gulf of Mexico is kind of turned into Gulf of America. It's not anymore that things go through Congress or by law, but actually private companies can change the geography we use via these apps. A photo that also went quite viral in Germany was our Chancellor Friedrich Merz visiting China in March, and he was greeted by dancing robots, by boxing robots, and recently in my feed, now there's a lot of robots, came up a half marathon of robots competing against each other. So they've kind of entered the sports in a way, but of course also the robots, which you also see with Friedrich Merz, and which you see downstairs in the installation of Beeple, have an enormous impact. They're often used now in war zones, in defense, in research. This is an interesting one from Italy. We had this lawsuit where Italy kind of files against Sephora because they used social media and AI and filters and everything to target minors, young children, to use skincare. So I'm just showing all these examples that, you know, this is literally from the last 2 weeks. I could give you 1,000 more examples. But it has to do with the influence of private companies into our daily life. And of course, the algorithms, which is a huge topic also in Mike's work downstairs, is the echo chamber. So whatever we like, we get more on this. So this leads to not a nuanced information delivery, but more to like a polarization of our society. When you think about AI, the biggest thing in our heads is also a lot of fear. There was a recent article, The Future We Feared is Already Here. So the fear is something that comes with AI, that the robots kind of take over. It's a fear that we make less decisions ourselves, but it's also a fear that it's not abstract anymore, because it's really, we're now in 2026, it's really happening already right now. Some more videos is these that go viral are these robots actually attacking humans. So this is just an image of how this taking over is already happening right now. But to me, when I saw these videos, I immediately thought, is this now real or is it AI? Is it fake news? So this is a crucial point because we cannot even trust anymore the images we see. We are blurred by these realities. Coming back to our museum, what is the role of the museum? A museum is a space where society kind of reflects on itself and reflects on transformations. And we are the museum of the 20th century, so we have a lot of art downstairs in our collection who reflects on the wars, on the reunification, on complex issues. And people also says it in, we created this beautiful ABC in a flyer. It gives you an insight of what, let's say, what is an NFT, what is blockchain, but it's also saying what is a museum to him. And people says a museum is a place for him where people actually don't scroll but look at something for longer than 5 minutes. We are not the only museum who's having this discussion right now. You've seen probably the new museum opened a new building in New York, and the first inaugural exhibition was on new humans. The discussion on robots and how they affect our lives is also a long history in the 20th century, also in the arts and in the film. You might know this movie Metropolis from Fritz Lang. It's from 1927, and it's actually currently shown downstairs in our beautiful exhibition Ruin and Rush, which just opened last week. And there you see already this dialogue of a sculpture by Belling with the movie of Fritz Lang. The Maschinenmensch, he called it at that time. The most prominent figure in art history of the 20th century is Nam June Paik, who introduced robots already early as in 1964. He even brought them out on the street, like Beeple does sometimes with his dogs, and he really wanted to see the surprise in the faces of the viewer. So he says, I wanted to meet them like a sudden rain shower. We do have a Nam June Paik in our collection. It's actually the family of robots. Nam June Paik did several families. It could be of scientists, and one is actually of artists, but this one was too big for our ceiling downstairs, so we included the Andy Warhol robot, which is a loan from Kunstmuseum in Wolfsburg, and it fits perfectly to this contextualization of people in a museum because one of Beeple's dogs is also Andy Warhol. Why Andy Warhol? Andy Warhol, of course, also blurs boundaries when he introduced pop culture to the arts, and it's interesting that both robots have TV. Like Nam June Paik is famous for including TVs in his sculptures. TV was at that time an incredible change in the circulation of images, which is now, of course, also internet and social media. But you see also in the sculpture, when you go downstairs, everywhere cameras. And also the piece by Beeple has a camera in his neck where he films the audience and prints photos out of that. So it's about receiving and seeing. Beeple. Who of you knew Beeple before? How did you know him? How? Twitter. Sorry? In person. Wow, lucky. Like me and Carolyn, actually, like many of us, I guess, heard for the first time of him when he had this big auction sale in 2021 with his Everydays. The Everydays is a compilation of works he did for almost 20 years now. He started in 2007 when he was studying computer programming, and the first ones were actually analog, so he literally draw them. And you can already see, which I like, that they're very similar to the ones today. It's not every, but some of them have a big face, and they're usually a commentary on society or politics. He quickly changed to digital drawing, digital painting, and this already in 2007, and developed and further, and now uses also a lot of AI tools. The most recent one is this one. It's from 2 days ago. Carolyn Christov-Bakargiev. How do we know Carolyn? Yes, the famous documenter. We're so happy you're here. And Carolyn was literally the first who said, who is an artist who makes 69 million in a sale, and I've never heard about him. So she actually engaged with Mike on a YouTube series, which I can highly recommend. It's hours and hours of talking of the digital art world with the traditional contemporary art world, you could say, and you learn so much on both sides, and it's just about curiosity and learning from each other. Why was she so curious about him? I think if we look back at the documenta, one of the highlights was, of course, Pierre Hugues, and there's a dog, and there's beehives, and it was a lot about actually the relationship of animals and humans. She will tell us more about this later. So it makes total sense that she also is interested now in the human and the non-human. This is a show she did with Beeple at Castello di Rivoli in Torino, of Human One, one of the first artworks that people actually took out from the digital platforms into a real object. It combines both. So you see this kind of vitrine object with this person walking around in the metaverse. I actually saw this piece in M+ Museum in Hong Kong a few years ago, and Carolyn also visited Mike in Miami, where he premiered these regular animals. They were shown in December last year in Miami, and we decided within a few months that we would like to show them here for Gallery Weekend. Another contemporary curator who is engaging with people is Hans-Ulrich Obrist. He also visited Miami, and he did a show with him in China in 2024. So now the robot dogs have come to Berlin, and Mike will give us now a short introduction on what are they all about. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much for coming out tonight. Very much appreciate it, and very much appreciate this opportunity to show at the Neue Nationalgalerie. It's amazing to see an institution that is so sort of like forward-thinking and wanting to show this brand new work and this sort of like dive into this topic of robotics and AI that I think is going to be very influential in the next sort of coming time here. The name of this piece is called Regular Animals, and it is trying to imagine a world in the future where sculptures are more living beings, and with the possibilities of robotics combined with AI, I think you're going to see a lot more works that feel alive and interact with the world and do unpredictable things. And so this is kind of a beginning sort of like step towards that. And so the way that the artwork works is there's these dogs that are autonomously sort of like moving around, trying not to bump into each other and trying to sort of stay in the pin there. And they are constantly taking pictures. And they take pictures of all the things that they see. And so they're taking pictures of the sort of like surrounding artworks. And then they also have printers on their back, and they occasionally sort of poop out those pictures. But before they do that, they reimagine the picture in the sort of style of each of the characters. So the Picasso dog will poop out a sort of like Picasso-type picture. The Warhol dog will poop out a picture that looks kind of like a Warhol sort of like screen print. And the idea behind why these characters, the people in the dogs are Warhol, Picasso, Zuckerberg, Elon, and myself, and Kim Jong-un. Thank you. Kim Jong-un's kind of a side character, but the idea behind these is that in the past, our view of the world was at least partially influenced by artists. The way that artists, Picasso painted the world changed how we saw the world. The way that Warhol talked about capitalism and consumerism changed how we saw, those things. Now, our view of the world is influenced by tech billionaires who control powerful algorithms that decide what we see and what we don't see. And they have very unilateral control over these algorithms that influence our view of the world. They don't need to lobby the UN. They don't need to go to Congress to pass a law to change these algorithms. They can just wake up in the morning and decide to tweak the algorithm, and everybody here will see different things. And so that's a huge amount of power that I don't think we've kind of fully sort of like internalized. And so that's kind of the main sort of like ideas behind this piece. The other kind of additional idea is with the combining of sort of like humans and robotics. I think this sort of like anthropomorphizing of technology, anthropomorphizing of AI is something that you're starting to see a lot. You hear people say things like AI doesn't have soul. It doesn't have a soul. Of course it doesn't have a soul. It's a computer program. Like, this table doesn't have a soul. This speaker doesn't have a soul. They're just inanimate objects. They, of course, don't have a soul. And so I think you're going to continue to see more of this idea of people assigning human qualities and human sort of like emotions to AI as it becomes more and more human-like. And I think that's going to lead us to some very weird places. And so this is trying to sort of anticipate the weirdness to come.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike, for this introduction. So, Carolyn, how did you encounter Mike, and what were your first conversations about? Do you remember them?
Yes, first of all, thank you very much, Mike, for doing the exhibition, Lisa and Klaus and the entire staff here for hosting us, and the audience for being here, because it's always a pleasure for me to talk, and therefore you need an audience to do that. So thank you. That said, how did you correctly said that I didn't know about Beeple before the sale, and because I'm rather known for knowing the young artists or emerge, even if they're old, the artists who then become very prominent, it's kind of a thing that I have accompanying me through my life. I was shocked. And the first idea was that he was a computer program, you know, that Christie's had done this kind of cheat thing where there was no human behind it. And so the day after the sale, I called the offices of the auction house and asked to speak with him, should he exist. And once you've done Documenta, you can sort of do that. You call up and say, I want to speak with this scientist, and they actually make the appointment. So he's on the phone a few days after the sale, and I realized not only was he a human, he was extremely, in my view, at the time, sensitive, perceptive, intelligent, and yet with huge kind of interests that were different from my own interests in history of art. So we then met in person some months after beginning these recordings, and I learned a lot from Mike. I'm very grateful to have learned so much about what was going on. One of the first things that came to my mind, which is, I think, important, but less discussed now, but it's extremely important, is that it came to my mind that numbers, that we are in a numerological time, historical time, that the digital is numbers, you know. It's transforming when you scan a bottle into numbers, and that the numbers of this invented money, which is the cryptocurrency, were also numbers. So suddenly it came to my mind that the same way gold was used in the gold ground of Siena paintings or Florentine paintings, and everyone knew that that was gold. It was not just light and sun and the divine. It was actually, it exemplified wealth in trying to not get the bubonic plague by doing something that would ingratiate the divine, it came to me to think that in this work, the numbers and therefore the exchange of works, which is something rather hidden normally in the art world. The entire art world is based also on exchanges and value and markets and so on, but it's a hidden thing as something that is not to be shown to publicly, that was one of the materials of the work. So this transformation into a mathematical world, let's say a statistical world, which got me thinking about, in general, the theological and the divine, more in general, because we attribute, and most societies and civilizations attribute mathematics to the gods. Pythagoras receives it from the gods. So suddenly we were moving from the mathematics of the gods, like in the proportions of Ani altar in Hindu architecture, and the hidden secrets of how you can enlarge it without it becoming just a cube. So you have to enlarge it in a proportional way, considering each point the center of that particular block, which expands together. It's not the same as taking one corner of the thing and just expanding it. And that mathematics of the gods was in competition with the algorithms of the humans. So we were in a very strange narcissistic era. Now, to go back to your question, I think I answered it, but not sure. I mean, why I was interested in it at the beginning. And anyway, because of that, I thought I never wanted to do an exhibition of digital art, for example, because I know the history of exhibitions of computer art, media art, and how it gets locked into ghettos of a kind of subordinate category. The same way I never did exhibitions of photography in art, or I never did an exhibition of women artists, even though there were more women in my documenta than in any documenta before or after. But for me, those questions must be somehow embedded in something else in the foreground. So I was thinking about these other questions when I decided to make an exhibition called Espressioni con frazioni, using the word fractions, which was the reference to the mathematics. And one of the galleries is a gallery that brought together 5 pieces. As you entered, there was a photograph of the cave paintings of Chauvet. So it had to do with movement and how movement is represented in life. And I must say, I'm not so sure there's not a soul in the speaker, you know. A lot of civilizations think that there's a soul in the speaker. I mean, all animism does. And they certainly thought there was a bison in the rock, for sure. And if you think about it, we are all made of subatomic particles that disperse and reconverge, sometimes in a beautiful person and a child, and sometimes in a flower. But it's all the same stuff that circulates in the universe. Anyway, so the bison drawings, the horses, sorry, they were horses, not dogs, but horses, were the introduction, followed by a work by Julie Meretu. And this was all discussed with the artists. I did speak at length with Julie if she would agree to be in a gallery with Beeple, you know. He wasn't exactly accepted in the art world. But Julie is a really radical person, and she also trusts people. And she understood that while she was, in my view, not her view, my view, she was trying to somehow work out pictorially how the brain works in a digital era. Its layerings, its trash, its density, its conflicts, its uncertainties. Mike was doing something a little bit different, but related to that. And that was followed by the Velocità Astratta of Giacomo Balla, as we were discussing again the movement. So the question of representing movement in a way within within modernity and the machine, the era of the machine. Mike was thrilled to be, I think, together with this very important work from 1913 of about the velocità astratta. So it's a depiction of the optical, but also phenomenological experience of speed and movement. And as you walk down, so your body as a viewer was walking through the gallery in the same way as the works themselves were related to this movement. So, and the choice of the distance was related to an analysis of the works and how they were dealing with movement and space. One arrives at the cube, which is, the digital movement is really running around in circles. Somehow we are running around in circles and not getting anywhere, in my view. And therefore, Human One was on a cube. The first version of Human One, actually, this one was referring, it was shortly after the invasion of Ukraine, and it was showing destroyed and damaged urban landscapes, which were quite strong in the media at the time in a way that they have been numbed a bit today. We see it. You showed Hassabis on the cover, and I would like to make a little interlude because it can be boring to describe an exhibition, but I'm doing my task. But Hassabis...
Because we only have 30 minutes left, and I think
then
we have
I'll skip my comment on Hassabis.
Yes, we skip it. Let's move to
You
Mike.
can ask me later. Anyway, this went to the other cube. So the bacon is in a cube, in a box. So this was about the feeling of existentialist crisis after World War II, where the subject feels that if they have hands, and if they do anything, the world, an atomic bomb will explode. So suddenly this impossibility of agire, of having agency in an immobile box was similar, in my view, to the box with him. Anyway, a few months later comes the crash after FTX, company of crypto investments. This Sam Bankman-Fried gets arrested, comes in Everyday. The Everyday gets censored. I put the Everyday as a painting in the Castello di Rivoli, and of course it's under Catalan because the reasons you can imagine, and then we talk. As you mentioned, we talk a lot, and so we were talking about the Salvator Mundi question, which has to do with numbers again, and real and unreal, and this is long before, the AI videos and stuff that we have now. Anyway, we were talking about the whole question of that sale, and then there was an Everyday that came out. Often, Mike's Everydays, they're related to things that happened in the day itself. And here are some things that he made as his Everydays, which continue. And the reason I wanted to show them is that I also think that the material of the work is the social media interactions. So it's not about whether this image is totally original in its graphic design. I mean, that's not interesting. And in fact, he uses AI as well. That's not the point. But the point is the social sculpture, in a way, we could use, it's a heavy word to use in Germany, but let's say the interactions with those images every day are one of the main materials of his work. And then we recently been talking about angels and the angelic, and I think there is a relationship between the agentic AIs and the angelic, therefore between agire and angelos, between acting and the messenger, which in certain periods of history take on a particular meaning. Now, we're not going to talk about his expressionist works, and we're not going to do this either. So there you go.
Thank you, Carolyn. You see, you have a big fan base in Germany. I guess what I learned also in the past interviews with the journalists, that there's actually a lot of questions about the path of Mike, because he didn't like go to art school. So I actually would like to start with the question to maybe, because it is also an interesting one that is new to many of us, maybe you describe a bit how you got to be where you are now.
That's a good question. So I did not go to art school. We got a computer in 4th grade. My parents are here. They got a computer for me in 4th grade, and that was a very sort of like pivotal kind of like moment in terms of like this object was like the thing. I was very sort of like focused on what you could do with this object, and it felt very powerful to me. And so initially I wanted to make video games. And so I went to school for computer science, and I thought, I'm going to make video games. And I spent all of my time in college making weird little sort of like digital abstract art, and realized halfway through the sort of like degree that I didn't really want to make video games. I was spending all my time making art. Why don't I just get a job doing web design, and then I'll sort of like put my real energy into making sort of like digital art on the side, because I didn't really see any path towards making money from that. And so I got a job doing web design and started putting art out, and this was in 1999 that I started college. And then in 2007, I started the Everydays and started posting a picture each day and sort of like growing a social media following from that. I also started giving away these sort of Creative Commons VJ clips, which were just short abstract clips that people started using for concert visuals. And continued sort of like growing a following and giving away sort of project files and giving away sort of different resources for people. And then fast forward to 2020, a bunch of my sort of like followers, by that time I had amassed a few million followers on social media, and my followers sort of like kept coming up to me and being like, hey, you got to check out this NFT thing. And at first it was like, this has nothing to do with me. This is just some like weird crypto thing. I'm a digital artist. I didn't see any connection. But they kept bugging me, and finally it sort of like clicked, and then things got crazy.
Yeah, because maybe to quickly explain this, what is your, I think, gift? You can explain these complex things. I've tried to read about NFT so many times before I met you, and I never understood it. And I think the basic answer is, in case you're wondering too why it got so crazy at once. So before, if you had a digital art and you uploaded it to the world, you couldn't add a value to it because you couldn't sell it. And because of the NFT and the blockchain, and you describe it always with the word birth certificate, there was some framing for it, so you could actually hold it and own it. And this was the major change in this digital art world, entering also the market, the art market. So then it got a bit crazy.
Yeah, I think that's a good sort of like explanation. It's really just sort of like ownership over a virtual object, and you can sort of like prove that you own it, and there's kind of a sort of growing consensus that the blockchain says who owns this sort of like piece. And you can't copy it in the way you can't just like buy 1 Bitcoin and then just copy and paste, oh, now I've got 2 Bitcoin. Everybody kind of is starting to understand that's how Bitcoin works. And NFTs are very similar, except you can say, I own this sort of like virtual object, and a growing number of people are sort of like, okay, yep, you're the person who owns that virtual sort of like object.
Yeah, but this is like prehistory.
Okay,
this is like
let's hear it.
No, I don't want to. I think it goes... can you zoom forward?
To today?
Yes.
Today's going great so far.
No, but there's been a whole evolution with high NFTs and all these people who were interested, and then it was crash, and now almost nothing in the NFT art world.
One sentence why it crashed. Maybe do you know why it crashed?
Crashed because people were buying a bunch of crap. I mean, I think that's like, at the end, people were speculating on these things, and like, at the end of the day, the things that have pushed forward people's idea of what art can be, what art can say, those will have lasting value. Everything else will not. That's it.
Yes.
And maybe you can explain how you had this idea to come into the real world.
Sure. So when the NFT thing started, prior to that, I had sort of like worked alone and sort of like never even really printed out my work. And so when the NFT thing started, a lot of people were saying, why would I pay for nothing? Why would I buy a JPEG? That's literally nothing. And so I was like, okay, you know what? That's actually a pretty good argument. And so I was like, well, why don't I make things that are sort of like physical embodiments of the ideas that are in these sort of like digital pieces? Because again, we all obviously still live in the real world here. And so the ideas are, to me, what's important about these things. And so if a physical object helps get those ideas across, then I don't see that as being sort of against any of the kind of like NFT stuff. And so I started making very sort of like simple kind of like displays for people to sort of like view their work. And then my brother, who's a mechanical engineer, quit his job and sort of like started to work with me and kind of build bigger things, and that's how Human One came about, and then, you know, these sort of like robot dogs and other weird stuff.
Can I add? You were sending underwear also.
I was also selling underwear, that
Not
is correct.
selling, sending. With
Sending my underwear, yes, that is correct.
So, but I would also like to more seriously...
I don't think any extra context is needed there.
No.
Next question.
But there is something I think important, if I can interact with this question. It's also about being a chameleon. I believe that Mike, according to the different context where he's doing something, will react to that context very much. So,
sometimes poorly.
So, for example, when he wanted to make a museum, like a foundation of his own work in Charleston, he made it look like a white cube museum, so he needed paintings, because a museum has paintings. So he would order these paintings painted by people, they're real paintings, of certain everydays. So it is adapted to the space in a way. So I think that this also, so the interest of the museum, for example, Castello di Rivoli, also makes it normal that he would make a painting of the Sam Bankman-Fried and then attach a smart contract to it, because it's the materials that you find in the place. So part of the physicalization is due to this shift in the audience also, in what language you speak in each place.
Yeah, and I guess also what you expect to see when you come to a museum. So Carolyn, when you showed his work, maybe two questions for you. When you showed his work at Castello, how were the reactions of the visitors? And if you think about it again, would you include Beeple into your documenta?
Thinking. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Maybe. The times were different. Okay, so first, what happened in Rivoli was very interesting. So there was an immediate positive, let's say, reaction. The children loved the work a lot. There were a lot of schools and children. Some collectors that are major collectors of your work saw the work for the first time there and then acquired it. You know, the people who owned in the past making car factories, so we won't mention names, but so that happened. But what was most astonishing to me is the relationship with the artists. So when I invited Mike, there were many other artists of very different parts of the world, very different ways of working or thinking. For example, I remember, just to give one example, Richard Bell and you got along really well. You know, Richard Bell, who is probably the foremost Australian Aboriginal artist who did the numbers on top of the Fridericianum of the restitution that we should give, and then the Turbine Hall. After that, Richard really engaged with you, and he said, we've been making NFTs for 40,000 years, you know, and so you're like a young kid who's coming along, and we've been doing this forever. I never understood what Richard Bell meant by we've been doing NFTs
I was just about to
for
ask.
40,000 years. But what I did perceive was that the very open mind of artists is more open than the mind of curators generally, and the mind of collectors that are more careful to certain external elements. So that's the first question. The second question, I think I have to make a mea culpa a little bit, which is that when I did the documenta, and I was thinking the years before the documenta, I was coming from arte povera thinking, and for me, the problem of humanity was the centralization of the anthropos, of the human, that we needed to become less anthropocentric, less human in order to become more humane. And that this meant what the Deutsche Zeitung said, that I wanted strawberries to vote, you know, on the front page. It's not that exactly I wanted strawberries to vote, but I was thinking of a civilization and a culture that would put on a more equal playing field level the different agencies and makers of the world, human and not human, and what they call now more than human. What happened though, which I was not expecting, and it happened the year after, I remember very clearly the year after I was doing a seminar in Harvard with the different museum directors of Harvard, and PhD students, and we were discussing how we could invent new systems of museums for the future, where we could reorganize the collections, like the mineralogical collection and the botanical museums together with the art museums, and redefine according to different parameters the way that we organize culture. And we were having lunch in a cafe in Cambridge, and there were all these professors from physics and science, and the director of the Museum of Scientific Tools, Peter Gallison, was there. And one of them said, you know, there's this new thing called algorithms. And everyone sort of said, well, what's that? You know, oh, it's just predictive statistics where you take the data and the choices of people and you predict what they like and you send them directed advertisements. Now, this was truly, therefore, the moment, that's 2013, the moment when it becomes of cultural relevance to contemporary life. So I hear all these young students tell me, oh, algorithms, Turing invented them in the 1930s and so on. And this is when something has shifted, sometimes the really studious people, they find the prehistory and they think the prehistory is the history. But actually, history happens in a certain moment. You know, there's a year, 1989, when something happened in this city. And so, and it carried many echoes, even though the roots may be before. So that thing happened in 2013. If I had done the documenta in 2014 or 13, for sure I would have invited Mike, and for sure I would not have encouraged what I perceived became a form of ecological thinking that was pessimistic. It was about how bad the human was, that whatever we do will destroy the planet. You know, if I do this, the icebergs will melt. So I saw an enormous number of young people in the years following that retreated from the perspective of free will and the importance attributed to the human condition, which is not a detail, the human condition. I mean, Simone Weil, when she wrote those notes, which became From Gravity to Grace, or Gravity and Grace, it's one of the most topical books, I think, to read now, today, Gravity and Grace. There was an hyper understanding of the importance of the human condition. Once you demolish the importance of the human condition, you don't save the planet. You actually allow for a numbing of the ability to feel, for pain, and so on. So I would not have done the documenta that way had I known that this would have been becoming a cultural trope so strong after. It wasn't the intention at all. So I would have invited him, but maybe if I had done it a year later, you know. And so I missed something really important. I missed a very, very important shift, tectonic shift that was happening. So I made a mistake, but it was a great exhibition.
So Mike, before you entered, let's say, the contemporary art world, you were already super known in your digital art world, and I'm sure you mentioned, but you did like these 2 Super Bowls, you did the graphic designs for concerts like Justin Bieber. So I was wondering, do you sometimes miss that world? Do you like the art world better, or?
It was a simpler time, I will say that. It was a simpler time. I don't miss it. Sometimes I do miss it. I think it was easier in some respects because it was very compartmentalized. The work that I made, which was called back then personal work, which was just the plain sort of like artwork, I didn't really have to consider whether somebody wanted to collect that. And most of the time I don't really consider that now, but it makes it a little more challenging because I have a pretty weird sort of like dark sense of humor, so the things that I make oftentimes are not something that people would usually want to collect. And so on the other side, then I would just make art, and I didn't really give a shit about the like freelance work that I was doing, so it was just like, I'll do whatever the hell you want. So the 2 worlds were very separate, and now it's messier.
I also wonder, because in the arts, usually the artists have the real name. And the other example that came to my mind is Banksy. And he also has a nickname, and he's from like a street artist. We all know he's extremely popular, like you. And he's also somehow has challenges to enter the real art world. You know, there's always a bit of a discussion around him. So maybe you can say why you have a nickname.
So that was more so, obviously everybody knows my real name as well, so I'm quite not anonymous. But it was more so when I was sort of like coming up and kind of like learning about, you know, the sort of like art things. I came up more through the sort of like graphic design world, where everybody in the graphic design world, or a lot of people, had sort of like pseudonyms online, and so that's why I sort of like chose a pseudonym. And I chose something that they're actually these sort of like toys from the 80s that's like a kind of like Ewok looking thing, but it also sounds kind of like a computer beep boop like thing, and it's just a bit more concise than my actual name.
Thank you. I mean, we have now 5 to 7. The official opening would be at 7. Carolyn, you want to add something?
So I wanted to ask you a question.
Last one.
To you.
Okay, to me.
I would like to know, given that you're, you know, a little bit younger than me, why did you decide to do this? What are you looking for?
I hope I actually answered it in my presentation, because I see so much relevance. I mean, in the conversation you bring to us, they are complex, they are scary, they are important, they affect us. I have kids. Social media is a big topic. The internet is a big topic. AI, how do they learn things? How do they navigate things? So I think this is a topic that needs a space in the museum where we can discuss these complex issues. So when I saw your work in Miami, it's like magnetic. You will see it in a minute. You see them, and they're much different actually than on the screen. They are so powerful with these very real masks, and you laugh at them, and it's like a good joke, but then the joke can't really, it's like, kind of, and something triggers, and it's like, is this the time I'm living in? Is this happening? What's the future going? So they had a lot of impact, and they didn't let me. They didn't leave me, which is always actually to me a good sign of a good artwork. And then I started this research, and I said, it's 2026. We have to bring this conversation to our museum.